All right, welcome to the second lesson from the Dutch landscape course. We did this one in class already, so if you are not interested in me rambling about what the idea was behind these exercises, then I suggest you skip not all the way to the end, but further away to the end, where we will discuss what you were supposed to learn from these exercises. What we did in class, however, was that I've given a couple of groups, a couple of different pictures from Dutch landscapes, even though some of you thought that they were from Africa, or some of you thought that they were from uh, another place somewhere far, far away. They were all Dutch landscapes because Dutch is a very diverse country and they have a lot of different types of landscapes. And I have asked you to solve these 4 questions with your group for each landscape. What elements of the landscape are visual in these pictures? Okay, so I've given one group this landscape, and this landscape went to another group, and then this landscape came straight out of a book from Mr. Berendsen, and then this one is a Dutch landscape somewhere, and then this is also a Dutch landscape, a little closer to home maybe for the most of us, and then this landscape. So a lot of different landscapes, and I've asked you to sort of summarize the elements that are visual in these pictures. Well, here in the middle you can see that there's a dike, there is, a levee is the English word for the American word for it, and there is also very strict straight lines in the landscape when it comes to these acres of these fields of, I don't know, whatever it is that they are have sowed there. There is infrastructure. Obviously, the levee or the dike is also infrastructure. By the way, be careful when you use the word dike. It is an actual word in English, and it does have the same meaning as the Dutch word dijk, but not many people use it, and it's also a word that sort of a swearing word for lesbians. So if 2 women are in love with each other and you refer to them as dykes, it's not a really nice thing to say. It's like, calling a homosexual man a faggot. So be careful when you use the word dike in English. I prefer you use the word levee, especially in America. So here we go. This is the ocean, or the North Sea, or probably the Waddenzee, and it's low tide. And then here you have these areas of land that are outside of the dike, outside of the levee. See how easy it is? Here I go again. So all of these are visual clues that you are in fact, a landscape. Here we have something else that's interesting that's going on. It's relief, so it's not a flat landscape like most of the Netherlands. And obviously, again, there's some infrastructure. There is some open fields going on right here. There's some trees. So vegetation is a lot different than in the other landscape. Here's a big old tree. So that's different. Also, some visual elements in the landscape include buildings. Not that many buildings around in this one, but buildings. Here we have a whole different type of landscape. We see one straight road, supposedly straight road, with some houses and some, well, whatever this is, a farm or a company, or I don't know what that is, and some wood, but it's mostly water, and the land parcellation again is very straight lines, but this time it's not different types of vegetables or crops or produce. This time it's just grassland, nothing else going on here. Nothing will grow because of the water level that is super high. So a lot of water in this picture. This is, in fact, if nothing would happen, this would just be a giant peat bog. And of course, Dutch people thought that it was a good idea to have some grassland over there, so that's why it's there. Now this is a completely different type. This is the Dutch desert. This is near Kootwijk. Radio Kootwijk is this building. and you can park your car over here, and then you can walk through this wasteland of sand. So here the dominant factor in the landscape is for sure the soil, what it is made up of. In the one we saw that there was some relief. There's some relief over here as well, some dunes of sand, and of course some trees who don't need a lot of water and are very resilient against sour soils. They could live there. And then there's two people going for a walk. um, I was there recently during the Christmas break, and I couldn't find all that much loose sand anymore. I made some pretty pictures though, like it was a desert, but you really had to look for it, and most of it was overgrown with grass. I don't know why. It might have been because it's also very, very, very soft winter, and there's no really a lot of frost going on. It was 12 degrees during December, so maybe a lot of stuff has grown there. But the most important factor here is absolutely the soil. It is the most dominant factor. It determines what can grow and what doesn't grow. Here, this is also a sand landscape, but this is far more cultural landscape, and you have the building and the cows, and visual landscapes include trees and habitation, of course, and etc., etc. And here was the last one. Again, another sand landscape. I tend to think that sand landscapes are, more beautiful, more diverse than the clay and the peat landscapes. But that's because I am from the sand landscapes. I come from a little place called Warnsveld near Zutphen in the Achterhoek, so in Gelderland. So it's far away from here. It's far away from where we live. And I grew up, when I was a little boy, my dad took me to these kinds of rolling hills on the Postbank, for example. This is the Veluwe. And the heath is growing, and it's in blooming, in fact. So beautiful summer's day. And this is a picture from the 80s. And this is where I used to walk when I was a little boy. I couldn't sleep in, and Sunday mornings I was up at 6 running around the house, waking everybody up. And my dad, being a sweet man, thought that my mom deserved some extra hours of sleep. And then he just threw me in the car and brought me over to the Veluwe. And he let me run wild over here, scaring, all the animals that were around. So for some visual clues, most of you found a lot of them. And then we were talking about forces: ice, water, wind, man, that made the element be there. Okay, so we decided that the infrastructure, like the levee and the sluice over here, and then parcelation of land, that was all made by the force of man. And then clay was a natural phenomenon occurring when all kinds of minerals were washed out of rock and then put down in an environment of sedimentation where there isn't a lot of flow of water. And so this is clay. And obviously, the force that brought it there was rivers and ocean and erosion and weathering and all those things that you've learned during the years. It was brought there. Lack of relief, obviously, because, this is a continuum. So this is the ocean floor 1,000 years ago. And now this is the ocean floor, and we've built a levee, and now it's ours. Here, natural processes include, obviously, because there's a lot of relief, there is some erosion going on and maybe some mass movement. Again, the people have decided that there should be an open field here, and they left the forest to be on top of the hill, and everything else they've just taken in use. So those are the types of forces that make up this landscape. The Alps hitting Europe from the south, Africa bumping into Europe from the south. They raised this South Limburg part up, and this is why there is some relief, and the rest of the Netherlands doesn't have it because the shock wave from that initial thrust didn't reach us. Here we have a peat bog. What happens in a peat bog? Not many people know this, and you will learn it later during this course, how we get peat bogs, so I won't go into it into fine detail now, but obviously man made the road, right? And this is also low-lying stuff, so all the water is just flowing here to this place because it's a very low place. And so processes include peat and area cultivation, um, agricultural lands being made by man out of wild lands. It's called cultivation. Here we have ice and winds that brought the sand here. This used to be in the middle of the North Sea, and then during the Ice Age, there was a period of time in which the winds blew and they blew all the sands over here. So the soil was mostly formed by the wind. Um, Again, it was a difficult one to get because we'll get there how these landscapes are built finally. And now this was built by a famous architect, Radio Kootwijk over here was a sending. They send stations to Indonesia back in the day where Indonesia was called India, and it was part of the Netherlands as a colony. We like to talk to people, and this is where the radio waves that got sent, the ultra long waves to Batavia, those were sent over here. So the building is from the, I think, 1920s or so, 1910, I don't know. Beautiful building, by the way. It's a very aesthetically pleasing building. It's very crazy. It's the first completely concrete building in the Netherlands. So if you're ever close, there's also some history there. Obviously, this is growing, and it's a natural process, photosynthesis, etc., etc. Now here, what forces? Not a lot of visual clues as to what forces brought it here. Now, man made the building, obviously. Man made the infrastructure and the fences, and nature did the tree thing with the growing and the photosynthesis again. But not a lot of visual clues as to what's in this soil. How this landscape got built by which forces. Maybe we'll get there later if we have some time. Now here, basically the same as Radio Kootwijk, except that here some heath is growing. Winds brought sands on which plants started to grow. And these dunes are literally just desert dunes. They're pretty much the same way. And if you see a particularly big one, which is not in this picture, maybe I should have a picture of it somewhere. Or maybe I can just claim that this is one. I don't know. You have a particularly big building. It's called a moraine. A building, what am I saying? A hill. It's called a moraine, and it was pushed up by ice, and we'll get there later during the course. So once we started to basically get all of these types of building blocks together, from the list, what elements of a landscape are visual, and then what forces, and we started to combine those in more of abstract containers. Like we came up with a list. The building blocks could be natural or cultural, and then relief, types of soil, climate, flora, fauna, land use, parcellation, type of habituation, infrastructure, and influence on nature. Those were really the most important building blocks of a landscape. We started to ask you, could you come up with a theory how some of these landscapes formed? Like, is there a sequence in which things happen? Now, this was very, very difficult for most of you, and this is what we'll come back to time and time again during this course. What we want is we need the building blocks, and we need them in the right order, and sometimes the order is very different because some of these processes are going on at the same time. Like, we tend to think of a mountain breaking down as weathering, erosion, and then it's flat. But weathering, erosion, sedimentation are going on in the same time. So time is an important factor here, and this is very difficult to get right for even the most professionally trained geographers and geologists. And finally, we did which belong together, do you think, and why? And then this is mostly a cultural landscape, and then this is a cultural landscape, and then this is a very, very cultural landscape, and then this we decided wasn't so cultural. This was more of a natural landscape. This was a cultural landscape. This was again a natural landscape. And so most of the Netherlands, we had said, is very, very much influenced by man. There is hardly any nature left in the Netherlands, and you really have to look for it to find it, because even this, people decide that this is a heath country now, and people also decide that this should be an open sort of desert-like environment. If nothing happens, if people stopped doing anything in the landscapes, it would all be this. It would be, eventually the Netherlands would be a large deciduous forest. All right, so then we decided that this was a sand area. This was most likely sand. This is sand. This is peat. This is it's not sand. It's loess. It's like clay that got there by the wind. Sort of, it's silt essentially, and all these differences in soil type are not that important for now. But as long as you know that this one is very fertile because of the clays, and this one is very fertile because of loess, which is not the same, but it's similar in the fact that it's got a lot of minerals in it. Now this, a lot of water, this a lack of water, this is a lack of water, etc. So these were the building blocks, and we had some processes, and we had some theories, and well, okay, that was very interesting. And then I started to talk about this. And this is a very important figure because it shows you not only the relationships between every geofactor, but it also shows you that, man, substrate, and climate are the most important ones in shaping a landscape together with time. Okay, you have some plants, you have some animals, you've got soil conditions, you've got water conditions, you've got air conditions. These are important, but man oversees all. And he decides which plants they're growing, which animals can live there. We influence the water because we put a pump there and pump our polders dry, right? I mean, we influence the soil with our artificial fertilizer, or we put some sand out and some clays in. We influence the air with our pollution, our cars, etc. We influence climate in this manner, actually. We influence substrate because the rock types and the relief is for a large part also up to man. We can break down stuff and we can build up stuff. Like, for example, the Netherlands is a very, very, very flat country, but we put the relief in there. So, like a levee, or I thought there was a while ago, Thijs Sonneveld was thinking about building a large mountain in the Flevopolder so that people could rock climb there, and we could train with our bicycles to become better climbers and finally win the Tour de France again after, 36 years or so. So anyway, this is also influenced by man, and it also influences man. These lines go both ways. Man is not just influencing climate, climate is also influencing man. Just think about how Inuit in Greenland live differently than we do, and than Zimbabweans live, for example. That has, for a large amount, got to do with the climate. And time is the overseeing factor that influences all of these things. It erodes substrates and rocks and shapes relief. It changes the soil, it changes the water, it changes the air, more CO2, less CO2, different climates. It's all overseen by time. And bear in mind that man is actually a part of the fauna that has become more important than other animals. So let's say 2.5 million years ago, man wouldn't have been here, man would have just been there, and we would have had no cultural landscapes. So that was the core of lesson number 2, that you understand this figurine and you understand that the building blocks of a landscape, together with processes in the right order, shape all these types of different landscapes.